Dean Anderson, welcome to LSAT Unplugged.
Thank you very much for having me, Stephen.
No, thank you for coming. I actually heard about you. I was listening to Live with Kelly and Ken, which is a video podcast put out by LSAC, and you were a guest on there recently, and you made some great comments about the U.S. News rankings and problems with using them as a sole criteria in the law school admissions process for pre-law applicants. So I'm wondering if you could share some other factors that students might want to consider when they're choosing a law school.
Sure. I certainly understand the allure of rankings. Americans love to rank everything from football teams to basketball teams and so on. But in the law school context, to me, those rankings are very misleading and not a really good method of choosing where you want to go to law school for a couple of reasons. I mean, one thing is that the rankings really overweight the amount of law review articles that professors produce. And so a school that's ranked fairly high on that is going to be a school where the professors are spending a lot of time on research and writing and publishing, law review articles, which is great. And my faculty does that as well. But it doesn't really help you as a student if what you're looking for is a school that's going to help you learn how to become a lawyer. And so at Drake, for example, our mantra, our philosophy is that we want to create complete professionals. So our faculty are hired because they know how to teach, they know how to practice law, and they know how to create that next generation of people that know what they're doing when they get in the courtroom. So when you're standing in front of a jury, no one's going to ask you, what was your law school ranked? They're going to ask you, do you know how to represent your client in the most effective way? And that's what we want to do as a law school. And so, I always say that picking a law school based on a ranking is like picking a spouse based on People Magazine, Sexiest Man of the Year awards or whatever. I mean, it's like deciding what you're going to do based on your horoscope. That's about as much validity as it has. So what you want to do is you want to think about the value proposition of that particular school. What kind of lawyer do you want to be? And let's say you want to be a prosecutor. Does that school produce? Look at their alumni. Have they produced prosecutors? Have they produced the sort of people that are doing the job that you want to do? And we really encourage people to think also about the value proposition, which means, how much money are you going to have to borrow in order to go to that school? And if you're looking at a career that is going to be, at a small firm or as a public defender or a public interest job that's not going to pay the sort of wages that you pay at a big law firm, then it probably doesn't make any sense for you to take out $200,000 worth of loans in order to do that. And so you also need to think very carefully about the financial aid package and then weigh that against what kind of career can I expect graduating from that school. So I certainly think people should look very carefully at the outcomes about, placement rates and bar passage rates and what sort of jobs that those law school graduates get, and then match it up with your aspirations and your other choices and make a decision that way.
I really like your focus on outcomes here, because one thing, when we look at the rankings, we look at the number of publications a professor has had or something like that. That might work for someone who's looking to go an academic route if they're looking for a mentor of some kind. But from what I see among my students looking to go to law school, that academia is not typically the path most of them want to go on, especially in recent years with the decline of the tenure track. And more of them are looking to go into government or private sector where that stuff may not matter that much.
No, I totally agree. And so what you want is, we always tout, for example, at Drake, our location in the state capital. So you can do internships at either courthouses or at government agencies, at public interest groups, or with the law firms that are located here in town. So, for an undergrad, if you're studying philosophy or history or something, being in a small college town kind of away from everything may be perfectly fine. But if you want to be a lawyer and you want to start getting the experience and building your resume to be able to show that potential employer that you know what you're doing and are ready to go, then you really need to think about, am I going to be able to get the experience, the real world experience that I need to build that resume so that, for example, my students work, I'm an environmental law guy, and so my students work at the state Department of Natural Resources. And then when they're ready to hire someone, they tend to look for those students that have already done internships there. Or you can take that experience and go to Colorado or Minnesota or New York and say, I've already done this kind of work at a state agency, and you can go work at EPA or another agency because you've done that kind of work. So I tend to think that in a profession like we're entering, our students are entering, the experience that you get is going to be so much more important than being able to say, well, I read a lot of articles about this, I've read about it, but it's sort of like a surgeon, saying, well, I've read about surgery, I've never actually done it. Well, law firms and government agencies and across the spectrum of legal employers prefer to have people that are ready to go and can actually say they've done the practice-oriented things that you need to do.
Yeah, I could imagine if we were to rework the rankings in some way, we could remove that focus on academic publishing by professors and instead replace it with an extra category that related to student experience in the field. So at some point during law school, maybe during 1L or maybe during 3L, of course. If you were to rework the rankings in some way, if you were to make your ideal rankings system, what other parts might you remove and what other parts might you add?
Well, my preference would be to not have rankings at all.
Sure.
I certainly am old enough to remember that world. And we have produced at Drake, and our ranking is not horrible, but it certainly doesn't represent the quality of school that we have. And so you look at the quality of our graduates and what they're doing. We have ambassadors. We have the current ambassador to China is a Drake grad. We have governors and lieutenant governors and chief justices of Supreme Courts and general counsel of major multinational corporations. And you think, if you remove the rankings and you just think about what can I do with this education? Where can I go? And then you look at the alumni from that school and what they've done with that education. To me, that's the greatest proof of your success, is the fact that your graduates are out there succeeding every day in the real world.
I really like that.
I don't know how to measure that. Although Forbes has had some success in measuring, kind of 10-year out alumni success rates. But even then you get into, well, maybe I'm the head of, we have a grad who's doing wonderful things with public interest immigration work. His salary may not be as high as the person in Wall Street, but I would say that he's doing, at least as much for the greater good. And so it's hard to measure success in terms of just monetary value, but certainly if you just look at where those alumni are and what they're doing, I think, that sort of success rate would be a really good way to look at things.
It's almost as if you're encouraging students to take a more holistic approach to how they consider where they want to go. We always think about how law school admissions on the flip side should be about more than LSAT and GPA. People are always saying, consider the soft factors. Right. And so admission officers will say, oh, we do a holistic review. And so it's like you're encouraging students to do the same. Don't base it all on the numbers. Actually look at the substance, which can't be quantified.
True. And so it is a lot like choosing a spouse, right? Or, the fact that when you choose a spouse, there are going to be a lot of factors that go into it, and it's going to be very personal to you, right? I mean, maybe I'm really interested and I know for sure that I want to do IP law. And so then maybe a school that specializes in IP will be a good fit for you, and it might not be a good fit for somebody that wants to do constitutional law, which is one of the things that we do really well. So it really is a matter of fit rather than ranking.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed when I was doing some research for this discussion today is that you guys have a trial practice program or institute of some sort. Am I right about that?
Yes, and we actually, and so, you want to talk about rankings, one of the new rankings is the American Bar Association ranks now based on students' performance in their competitions. So they take the moot court competitions, the arbitration, the negotiation, and the client counseling competitions, and they add up the scores of your students from those four competitions, and then they rank the schools nationwide. And we ranked number 3 in the country in that this year. And to me, that is like a basketball team going out, and you have 2 basketball teams now. It's March Madness now, so I'm all thinking about basketball. But you wouldn't have those 2 teams go out on the court and you say, well, Duke is ranked higher than North Carolina, so we'll just give the trophy to them. You would say, you got to play the game, right? And you're going to prove that you're the best on the court. And the thing I like about that ABA competitions ranking is that, we go out and we get on the court with Harvard and our students beat them, then we're going to be ranked higher, right? And it's not, and they can't just sit there and say, well, but we're from Harvard, you can't beat us, we're from Harvard. Well, that's real life too. You go in a courtroom and the jury's not going to ask where you went to law school. They're going to ask, do you know what the heck you're doing? And that's what I want our students to do, is to be able to get that out there on the court and be able to show that they know what they're doing. And that's the philosophy of everybody here at Drake, and I'm sure at a lot of other law schools as well.
That's a really cool idea, because that's something qualitative that can't really be gamed in the way that money spent per student, it's easy to spend more money, right? It's something that doesn't necessarily indicate anything. Or my favorite, which is this, where they ask everyone, which law school do you think is best?
Right.
It becomes a kind of circular logic there, right?
Right. And I wouldn't blame somebody in New York City that doesn't know as much about Drake as they should, because I don't know as much about law schools in New York City as well. So it is really a stupid way to go about judging quality. And as you say, one of the factors is how much money do you spend per student? Well, what a perverse incentive, right, for us to raise the cost of law schools. And it so happens that we're able to deliver a quality education at a lower price because we're in the Midwest. People, the salaries are not as high in the Midwest. Land prices are not as high in the Midwest. Our adjunct professors are wonderful people, but they're willing to donate their time. And much of the time, we don't have to pay them a whole lot to teach for us. They're wanting to do it because they love teaching. And so we're able to deliver that quality education at a lower price, and yet that is counted against us, which I think is very sad.
Yeah, what if you were to do something like loans taken out per student? How would that differ, right?
Now that would give people a great incentive, wouldn't it? To try to make sure that they're doing everything they can to get that student through without having to take out a lot of loans. I think that would be a great thing to look at.
No, thanks for brainstorming this with me. I'm hoping that we can't necessarily get US News to change its rankings, but we can encourage students to think about the other ranking systems out there and then just looking in a qualitative way as well.
Right. And I think students tend to that they think that law firms or employers are paying a lot of attention to those US News rankings, and it's really not true. I mean, I think maybe at the top 100 law firms in the country, they probably do think about rankings to some extent. But, for the vast majority of employers, they're much more interested. If you ask them, just pick a random school, what rank is this school? I would say 99% of those employers would have no idea what the rank of that school is. But they will want to look at your resume and see how well you did and what sort of experience you've been able to gather as you prepared for practice.
Well, like you said, the real world experience, internships, externships, summer associateships, things of that nature that go on your resume where you can prove you can do it because you've done it in the past.
Right. And so our clinical programs, for example, you mentioned our trial practice program, and we've had students, I think students should really think about the value of a clinical program, because there you're representing real clients. You have a professor sitting next to you, but you're doing the work. And so we had a student a couple of years ago who had six jury trials before he graduated. And he was the first, it wasn't like he was carrying the briefcase or just shuffling documents. He actually handled the jury trial from start to finish. You have a professor sitting next to you in case you start to crash and burn, but otherwise it's you, right? And so you have a lot of lawyers that have been in practice for quite some time that haven't had 6 jury trials before they graduate. But just, if you think about how am I going to develop the skills that I'm going to need to have as a lawyer, clinical programs are one of the best ways to do that, because you get to actually have a client sitting across from you and start to think about, what do I need to bring to the table in order to serve that client's interests? And you really can't do that until you do it. You know what I mean? You can't, it's not going to do any good to sit and think about it in a classroom. You have to actually do it before you can start to figure out how you're going to develop those skills.
And those are skills you can only learn in practice. A lot of them are public speaking skills, presentation skills, and then the preparation as well, and being able to be spontaneous on the fly depending on how things play out.
Right. And so it's sort of it is, going back to basketball, it is a lot like learning to play basketball, right? You're not going to just sit in a classroom and talk about it. You might sit in a classroom and learn the rules of how to play basketball, but then you need, as soon as possible, to get out on the court and start doing layup drills and, practicing the skills that you need. And then you work your way up to a scrimmage game, and then you work your way up to real games. And the more real games you can play, the better, right? And so the same thing is true in law school. You're going to spend some time at Drake and other schools with this philosophy. You'll spend some time the first year in the classroom learning, the basic law that you need. And then the second year, you'll start to mix in some simulation classes like trial advocacy or negotiations, where you start to practice those skills. And then by your third year, you should be in the clinic or in an internship where you're getting to actually practice those skills in the real world, so you can, hone them before you graduate. And the other advantage of it too is that you can start to figure out what kind of things you like and what you don't like. Because it might be that you really love criminal law in theory. You like the idea of criminal law, you like the issues. But then you start practicing it, and you realize, I'm terrible at this, I hate this, this is not what I want to do. And then you have time to change gears and become a tax lawyer or whatever, right? You can start to, test out what you think you might be interested in by actually doing it. And really, you can't know. The study of a subject is often quite different from actually practicing it. And in some cases, you might hate studying about it, but love practicing it. And the opposite is also true.
Right. You're reminding me, even just for undergrad students, how they enter college thinking they'll have one major, then they think they'll like it, but then studying it, they don't like, and then they change altogether. But then the practice, of course, is a whole nother decision point where people might change their path. Right.
And that is also a caveat. If you go to a school that kind of puts all its eggs in one basket, where they are really known for one thing and one thing only, if you decide, halfway through that that's not what you want to do, is there going to be enough room in the curriculum for you to shift gears? And so that's another consideration to think about is, if you do go to a place where it's really focused on one area, one subject area, make sure that that's really what you want to do, or that there is enough room in the curriculum for you to switch to other things.
Yeah, those are some great points for consideration. Thank you for sharing that. I'm wondering if we could shift gears a little bit and just briefly touch on something related to admissions, maybe related to student engagement, reaching out to admission officers in the process of applying, or about financial aid, perhaps. Any comments you could share on those?
Well, and I know you've talked about the LSAT quite a bit on your program, and I certainly recommend taking the LSAT more than once if you are able to. Even a few points different on the LSAT can make a huge difference in financial aid. And so that is, and it is true that almost all schools at this point are only going to focus on your high score. And so it's really no risk to take it more than once. So that's one thing. I would say, your personal statement, make sure that you have somebody else look at it to proofread it, because, it really doesn't matter as much what you say in your personal statement as how you say it. What we're looking for is that you can put sentences together, that you are a careful person so that you don't have misspellings or grammatical errors. And so just being able to say, have a coherent paragraph, coherent sentence structure is much more important than, trying to come up with the most novel idea for a personal statement. That's not really what it's about. It's really more about, although, certainly saying a little bit about your motivation for going to law school is good. We often find that people that have strong motivations do better in law school than people that don't, that are just kind of there because they can't think of anything else to do. And so to the extent that that motivation comes through in your application, I think that's important as well.
Oh, thank you for sharing those comments. Yeah, the LSAT retake thing, I keep trying to tell students about it, but there are some law schools that don't update their websites or try to indicate that they consider multiple. So it's good to get the confirmation from you that schools are only considering the highest, or at least the vast majority are. Yes.
And I know it's expensive, and I know it's, an investment of time to study and take it and so on. But, and you certainly wouldn't want to have on your, when it gets to the point where you're taking 5 or 6 LSATs, then, that's definitely overkill. And at some point, you sort of are what you are. But we are able at Drake, because of our size as a small private school, we're able to actually read every file.
Oh, wow.
So we have a committee that actually looks at every file and reads every file. And so it is true that, with your grade point average, it's not just a number to us. I mean, we will look at the courses that you took, the rigor of the program that you were in, the pattern of grades, so that if it, everybody has a rough semester maybe, or you had a rough year because of some personal circumstances, but then once you overcame that, your grades got better. Well, we can look at that and we can say, okay, maybe this is more than a 3.2. Maybe it's really better than that because of the pattern, of that one rough year or semester.
Well, it's nice that you're able to look deeper into things and then also evaluate the personal statements, not only for just the content, but also the writing style, because of course, lawyers do need to be able to write well.
Yes. And we certainly don't want to reward people that decide, well, I'm going to take the easiest courses I possibly can, instead of taking that hard physics class or whatever. We certainly don't want to discount the rigor of the curriculum.
Right. Well, Dean Anderson, this has been enormously helpful, and I want to be respectful of your time. And what's the best way for students to reach out to Drake if they have questions about applying or about details on this school?
Well, you certainly go to law.drake.edu is our website, and there's admissions information there, and certainly can click on our admissions office, and they'd be happy to give you whatever information you need. So I appreciate the time and think that this is a great way to get information out, and certainly I think people should feel free to engage with the admissions office. That's what they're there for. So don't be shy about calling them and asking them questions. I know our professors are happy to talk to students about their particular expertise and what we have to offer in that area. And so you can certainly ask to speak to a professor and really hear detail about the particular area that you're interested in.
Well, that's great to hear. I would definitely encourage students to reach out, ask your questions, reach out to the professors in your areas of specialty, because it really can help you make a more informed decision.
Right. And I'm an environmental law, so if anybody's interested in that, I'd be happy to talk to them.
Very important field. Yeah, no, I'm glad that you're offering yourself up as a resource. So thank you again, Dean Anderson. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Yes, great. Nice to talk to you.